Chapter 7, Heresy and Poetry. Should the troubadours be regarded as having been believers of the Catharist Church and the bards of its heresy? This view, which I shall call the maximum view in contrast to the one which I feel I myself am authorized to adopt, footnote 1, it is set forth on page 101 and is discussed at great length in chapter 10, was put forward by a succession of venturous spirits such as Otto Rahn, and in my opinion, they damaged it by trying to make it too plain at a historical rather than a spiritual level. Yet it is a view singularly irritating and stimulating, for it seems as impossible to reject as to accept, as impossible to demonstrate as to deny utterly, and this is due to the very essence of the phenomenon that it seeks to account for, an affair both historical and archetypal, both psychical and mystical, both concrete and symbolic, or if you prefer, literary and religious. The data are roughly as follows. On the one hand, the Catharist heresy and courtly love developed simultaneously in the 12th century and also coincided spatially in the south of France, footnote 1. The first troubadour, William of Poitiers, died in 1127. The earliest references to an organized and public Catharist church date from 1160, but already in 1145, according to Borst, Catharism was found to have spread in Bulgaria and England. The name appears that year in Germany and 2 years later in Languedoc. Arno Borst infers that Catharism invaded Europe in a couple of years. He is surprised. I do not believe it. Under other names or even without name, Catharism existed in people's minds much earlier than historical texts. Its doctrines were condemned in France as early as the 11th century, at Orleans, in Poitou, in Perigord, and Aquitaine, and that is to say, and let us not fail to notice it, in the very places where the first troubadours appeared. How suppose that the two movements were entirely unconnected? For them not to have entered into relations would surely be the strangest thing of all, but on the other hand, in weighing the opposite side of scales, how could there be a connection between those somber Cathars whose asceticism compelled them to shun all contact with the opposite sex? Footnote 2. This went so far as to prevent a perfect from sitting on a bench if a woman had recently left it. Yet many women of the nobility were Cathars, and troubadours dedicated to them their lays. And the bright troubadours, joyful and up to any folly, who turned love, the spring, dawn, flowery gardens, and the lady all into song? Our modern rationalism is entirely at one with the Romanist scholars who declare unanimously that Cathars and troubadours had nothing in common. But the irrepressible intuition of those venturous spirits to whom I referred above answers with the approval of our common sense. Quote, "Show us then how Cathars and troubadours were able to rub elbows day after day without making one another's acquaintance, and how they could live in two completely watertight worlds amidst the great psychical revolution of the 12th century. To refuse to understand the heresy and courtly love, each by means of the other and with but one movement of the mind, looks very much like refusing to understand each of them one by one. What is there in favor of the venturous view? Rougemont V, Count of Toulouse and suzerain of Languedoc, wrote in 1177, quote, "The heresy has penetrated everywhere. It has sown discord in every family, dividing husband from wife, son from father, a man's wife from his mother. Even priests yield to the temptation. The churches are abandoned and falling into ruin. The most important people on my estates have been corrupted. The crowd has followed their example and has given up the Catholic faith, so that I no longer dare to undertake anything." End of quote. How suggests that the troubadours lived and sang in such a world as is pictured there, without caring what went on in the heads and hearts of the noblemen on whose bounty they lived? In reply to that question, we are told that the first troubadours were seen in Poitou and the Limousin, where the heresy had its center more to the southward, in the county of Toulouse. But we find that the language which the troubadours of the Limousin employed from the beginning is the language of the county of Toulouse. And the same language was soon being used by troubadours in other parts of Europe. It is also contended that the courts most often named by troubadours as making them particularly welcome were those of nobles who remained orthodox. But that does not hold for all of them, far from it, as will be seen presently. Moreover, quite possibly the presence of troubadours at such courts is a sign of heretical tendencies in them. Here is the beginning of a song by Pere Vidal. Quote, "My heart rejoices on account of the agreeable and sweet renewal, and on account of the castle of Fanjeau, which seems paradise to me, for love and joy are confined there, as well as all that is due to honor, and sincere and perfect courtesy." End of quote. Who would dare to say, or even think for a moment, that those lines sound Catharist? Yet what is the castle of Fanjeau? One of the mother houses of the Cathars, the most famous of heretical bishops, Gulbert of Castres, directed it in person from 1193, and the poem quoted above may be ascribed to about 1190. It is in the same castle that Esclarmonde of Foy, the highest of heretical ladies, received the consolamentum. The second verse of Vidal's song speaks solely of the ladies. Quote, "I have no enemy, however mortal, whose true friend I do not become if he speaks to me of the ladies and does them honor and praise. And as I am not in the midst of them, but am going to another country, I utter my plaint, I sigh and I languish." End of quote. The reader may well wonder if Pere Vidal can be more than an amusing gallant, a flatterer of the wealthy women who formed his public, but the rest of the poem is disturbing. He lists the houses in which he has been made welcome and the places from which, alas, he has to take leave so as to get to the province. The castles of Laurac, Gaillac, Saysac, and Montreal. The counties of the Albigenses and of Carcasses. Quote, "where the knights and women of the country are courtly," end of quote. And he refers to, quote, "Dame Louve, who has so completely conquered me that, by God and my faith, her gentle laughter lingers in my heart," end of quote. Now we happen to know that every one of those castles was a well-known focus of the heresy, that they were even, quote, "heretics' houses," end of quote, convents of a kind, that the counties named were notoriously Catharist, and that the Louve is a Countess Stephanie, alias La Loba, who belonged to a group of active heretics. The poem, entitled in a modern anthology in all innocence, quote, "Thanks for gracious moments of hospitality," end of quote, thus acquires the unexpected character of a kind of pastoral letter. And yet I read it over again and rub my eyes. Can this really be an instance of pure coincidences? The doubt and the question recur ad infinitum. It is again a pure coincidence, perhaps, that the troubadours, like the Cathars, extolled, without always practicing, the virtue of chastity. That, like the pure, they received from their lady but a single kiss of initiation. That they distinguished two stages in the Domne, the prière or prayer, and the entendre, as the Church of Love distinguished between believers and perfect. The troubadours scoffed at the marriage bond which the Cathars called the ignorata fornicatio. They reviled the clergy and the clergy's allies, the members of the feudal castes. They liked best to lead the wandering life of the pure, who set off along the road in pairs. And in their verse are expressions taken from Catharist liturgy. It would be only too easy to go on finding similar coincidences, but what of the arguments on the other side? Not all the troubadours, I shall be told, were supporters of the heresy. A number ended their days in a convent cell. No doubt, and moreover, Folquet of Marseille turns out to have taken part in the Albigensian crusade, but on that very account he was considered a traitor, and one day was brought before Pope Innocent III and charged with having caused the death of 500,000 persons. As far as that goes, even if it could be shown that certain troubadours in particular never suspected the essence of a close connection between the themes of their poems and Catharist doctrine, that would not show that the origin of the poetry was not Catharist. The troubadours, it should be borne in mind, displayed an admirable unanimity in composing their coblas and their servants. They all obeyed the same rhetorical canon. It is easy enough for poetry, and possibly very beautiful poetry, To be written with commonplaces of the time, and for the poet concerned not to suspect the source of those commonplaces. Beauty apart, is this not indeed usual? And if it is objected that the troubadours in the poems that have come down to us never refer to their beliefs, the obvious answer is that the Cathars had to promise, on initiation, never to betray their faith, no matter what kind of death might seem to be in store for them. Thus, the records of the Inquisition contain not a single admission about the Minasola or Malasola, or again Manisola, the highest initiation ceremony of the pure. We should also give due weight to how often the courts of love discussed the question, can a married knight be true to his lady? For all the troubadours had to undergo the semblance of a marriage with the Church of Rome. They were clerks while serving in their thoughts another lady, the Church of Love. Bernard Guy, in his Manual de la Inquisitor, shows that although the Cathars venerated the Blessed Virgin, she was not, in their belief, a woman of flesh and blood, the mother of Jesus, but their church. Ouch! It's a hard knock life. It will be said that some troubadours abjured the heresy without giving up the trobar. But it would not astonish us at all to see a newly converted poet of today devote to the Virgin images which he had invented for the praise of others and had at his stock in hand. I shall be told that Pere of Auvergne did penance, but what better proof that he had been a heretic? However, let us turn to the textual evidence which exposes the rhetoric in its sheer nudity and transparency. Nudity. It's crudity. It's nudity. However, let us turn to the textual evidence which exposes the rhetoric in its sheer nudity and transparency. There is the theme that death is preferable to earthly rewards. Far more it pleaseth me to die than easy men delight to feel. For what will meanly satisfy, nor can nor ought to fire my zeal. Damn, I couldn't cut on my foot from that. Sorry, that's not in the book. Nothing is easy. The Almeric de Bellenoy, what will meanly satisfy, would rid him of his desire, were it not that the ill he cherishes is love without end, joie d'amour, the frenzy that prevails over all else. In fact, this wild desire is bound to be my death, no matter if I stay or go, for she who could deliver me, no pity will she show. And this desire, although it hath from the frenzy sprung, it certainly prevails above the others all. That's a good one, huh? Let me read that again. In fact, this wild desire is bound to be my death, no matter if I stay or go. For she who could deliver me, no pity will show. And this desire, although it hath from frenzy sprung, it certainly prevails above the others all. God, it's fucking like war. Let me read a couple of those paragraphs again. However, let us turn to the textual evidence which exposes the rhetoric in its sheer nudity and transparence. There is the theme that death is preferable to earthly rewards. Far more it pleaseth me to die than easy mean delight to feel. For what will meanly satisfy, nor can nor ought to fire my zeal. Thus Almeric de Boulogne, what will meanly satisfy would rid him of his desire, were it not that the ill he cherishes is love without end. Joy d'amour, the frenzy that prevails over all else. In fact, this wild desire is bound to be my death, no matter if I stay or go. For she who In fact, this wild desire is bound to be my death, no matter if I stay or go, for she who could deliver me, no pity will she show. And this desire, although it hath sprung from... I'm going to start again. Come on. However, let us turn to the textual evidence which exposes the rhetoric in its sheer nudity and transparence. There's the theme that death is preferable to earthly rewards. Far more it pleaseth me to die than easy mean delight to feel, for what will meanly satisfy, nor can nor ought to fire my zeal. Thus Almeric de Boulogne, quote, what will meanly satisfy, end of quote, would rid him of his desire, were it not that the ill he cherishes is love without end, joy d'amour, the frenzy that prevails over all else. In fact, this wild desire is bound to be my death, no matter if I stay or go. For she who could deliver me, no pity will show. And this desire, although it hath from frenzy sprung, it certainly prevails above the others all. If he does not wish to die yet, it is because he feels that he has not yet become detached from desire. And feels that he would be leaving his body out of despair. A mortal sin. It is also that he is still unaware how this may be his wheel, that ecstasy his soul shall softly steal. In fact, this wild desire is bound to be my death, no matter if I stay or go, for she who could deliver me no pity will she show, and this desire, although it hath from frenzy sprung, it certainly prevails above the others all. If he does not wish to die yet, it is because he feels that he has not yet become detached from desire, and feels that he would be leaving his body out of despair, a, quote, mortal sin, end of quote. It is also that he is still unaware how this may be his weal, that ecstasy his soul shall softly steal. Did not the Catharist doctrine require that life should be ended, not out of weariness nor out of fear of pain, but in a state of utter detachment from nature? Footnote 1. Deodat Rocher, a living scholar intensely interested in Catharism, his Etudes Ménachènes et Cathars, 1952, and Le Catharism, 1938, insists likewise that in the Catharist view there was a, quote, danger of flying too swiftly up to heaven, end of quote, and opposes Catharism to Buddhism on the truly capital point. Next, here is the theme of parting, the leitmotif of all courtly love. Heaven, how doth it thus befall? The farther off I am, the more I long for her. Then there is the Garot de Bornheil, who prays to the true light, footnote 2. When a troubadour uses the word true before any of the words God, light, faith, or church, it may be a sign of Catharism. The Cathars took care to speak the language of orthodoxy, adding that significant little qualification for the benefit of the initiate. Then there is Garot de Bornheil, who prays to the true light as he waits for the dawn of terrestrial day, the dawn that is going to reunite him with his co-pained, or comrade, of the road, and hence of his trials in the world. We may wonder whether the two co-pains are not soul and body, the soul bound to the body but hankering after spirit. And we may also remember that missionaries go forth in pairs. O high and glorious King, O light and brightness true, O God of power, Lord, suppose it pleases you, make my comrade welcome, and grant him all your aid. For him I have not seen since fell the night's dark shade, and soon will come the dawn. But by the time the troubadour reaches the end of his lay, has he betrayed his vows? Or has he found in the bosom of night that true light from which there must be no parting? Noble comrade mine, so happy I am, so happy am I where I stay. I never wish again to see the rise of dawn or day, the loveliest of maidens that a mother could ever bear. I now hold closely in my arms, so I no longer care what happens to the envious or the dawn. The nightingale was cheerfully giving throat to the trill that later on, in the second act of Tristan, provided Wagner with Bringane's sublime cry. Habet act, schon weit dem Tag die Nacht. But Tristan has his answer. Ever hold us, O night. There is a parallel in the beginning of another anonymous, quote, dawn, end of quote, footnote 2. Dawns were an accepted kind of poem. It will readily be understood how appropriate they were for the purposes of a vision of the world in which day and night were hostile to one another. Quote, in a garden, in a hawthorn nook, the lady has held her lover in her arms till the watchman cried, quote, God, it's the dawn, how quickly it comes, end of quote. quote, how I should like, my God, that night should not end, that my friend could stay by me, and that never the watchman called the rise of dawn. God, it's the dawn, how quickly it comes, end of quote. But in no poem is it clear whether the, quote, fair lady who ever says no, end of quote, is a woman or a symbol. The troubadours all swear that they will never betray the secret of their mighty passion, as if it were a faith, and one that had been imparted to them by initiation. I'm going to read that again. But by the time the troubadour reaches the end of his lay, has he betrayed his vows, or has he found in the bosom of night that true light from which there must be no parting? Noble comrade mine, so happy am I where I stay. I never wish again to see the rise of dawn or day. The loveliest of maidens that a mother could e'er bear, I now hold closely in my arms, so I no longer care what happens to the envious or the dawn. The nightingale was cheerfully giving throat to the trill that later on in the second act of Tristan provided Wagner with Bringane's sublime cry, habet act, schon weicht dem Tag die Nacht. Oh, and then footnote 1, they give the translation. Have a care, now night gives way to day. But Tristan has his answer, quote, ever hold us, O night, end of quote. There's a parallel in the beginning of another anonymous, quote, dawn, end of quote. And then footnote number 2, dawns were an accepted kind of poem. It will readily be understood how appropriate they were for the purposes of a vision of the world in which day and night were hostile to one another. Quote, in a garden in a hawthorn nook, the lady has held her lover in her arms till the watchman cried, God, it's the dawn, how quickly it comes. How I should like, my God, that night should not end, that my friend could stay by me, and that never the watchman called the rise of dawn. God, it's the dawn, how quickly it comes, end of quote. But in no poem is it clear whether the, quote, fair lady who ever says no is a woman or a symbol. The troubadours all swear that they will never betray the secret of their mighty passion, as if it were a faith, and one that had been imparted to them by initiation. Quote, cease, I tell you, in the name of love and in my own name, treacherous accusers. Steeped in every kind of malice, cease asking who is she and which her country, whether near or far. This I shall keep well hidden from you. I would rather perish than fail by so much as a word. What lady could be worthy of such a sacrifice? In this cry of William of Poitiers, by her alone shall I be saved. Or this invocation by Hugues de Saint-Cirque of a Dame Sans Merci, I do not wish God to aid me, nor to give me joy and happiness except through you. If these are only rhetorical tropes, we must ask ourselves what attitude of mind produced them and what kind of love can have been their platonic idea or form. In the song Du Mondre Tiers d'Amour, the tierce love of women, Gerot de Kellenson says of the two other tierce loves, the love of parents and heavenly love, quote, "To the second is suited nobility and thanks, and the first is so lofty that its powers hover above the sky." End of quote. This 1 in 3 love, this feminine principle, amour in Provençal is of the feminine gender, which Dante presently found moving the sky and all the stars, seems indeed to be the divinity in itself of the great heterodox mystics. The God of before the Trinity mentioned both in the Gnosis and by Meister Eckhart. And more exactly still, the superessential God who, according to Bernard of Chartres, 1150, resides above the heavens, and of whom noise, the Greek voice, is the intellectual and feminine emanation. Nothing else would produce the uncertainty, the sense of dubiousness which we cannot fend off as we read these love poems. The poems are about a real woman, footnote 1, generally referred to by a symbolic name or sinhal, even as the Sufi mystics refer to God in their poems. The poems are about a real woman. The physical pretext is there, but as in the Song of Songs, the tone is truly mystical. Scholars keep on saying that this indicates something perfectly simple, a fad for idealizing woman and natural love, but they do not say how the fad arose. Was it from some idealizing humor? Consider the Lay by Pierre de Rogiers. Bitter, bitter my distress must be, and never, never must my heart give up its great and overwhelming grief for her, nor I be granted e'en a passing hope of joy, however sweet, however good. Great joy could acts of prowess bring to me. I'll do none. All I know to want is she. I'm going to read that again. Consider the Lay by Pierre de Rogiers. Bitter, bitter my distress must be, and never, never must my heart give up its great and overwhelming grief for her, nor I be granted e'en a passing hope of joy, however sweet, however good. Great joy could acts of prowess bring to me. I'll do none. All I know to want is she. And the cry of Bernard of Ventador, quote, "She has taken my heart, she has taken myself, she has taken me from the world, and then she has slipped away from me, leaving me with only my desire and my parched heart." And next, from Arnaut Daniel, a nobleman who turned wandering jongleur and whose poems, according to authorities on the Romance languages, are, quote, devoid of thought, end of quote, are two verses which seem to me to possess the very demeanor of negative mysticism and to display its invariable metaphors. Quote, I love and seek her so eagerly that I believe the very violence of my desire for her would deprive me of all desire whatsoever could one lose aught by loving well. For her heart drowns mine in a never diminishing flood. I want neither the Roman Empire nor to be named its pope, and for a very good reason, if I am not to be brought back to her for whom my heart is ablaze and cleft in twain. But if she has not solaced my anguish with a kiss before the new year, she destroys me, and I am damned. End of quote. The intuition which directs this inquiry must be followed to the extreme end. If the lady is not simply the church of love of the Cathars, as Aurot and Paladon considered they were entitled to think, nor the Sophia Maria of the Gnostic heresies, the feminine principle of divinity, why should she not be the anima, or more precisely, man's spiritual element, that which the soul imprisoned in his body desires with a nostalgic love that death alone can satisfy? I want to read that again. The intuition which directs this inquiry must be followed to the extreme end. If the lady is not simply the church of love of the Cathars, as Aurot and Paladon considered they were entitled to think, nor the Sophia Maria of the Gnostic heresies, the feminine principle of divinity, why should she not be the anima, or more precisely, man's spiritual element, that which the soul imprisoned in his body desires with a nostalgic love that death alone can satisfy? In the Cathalia, or Chapters of Manes, footnote 1, discovered at the Fayum in Egypt in 1930 and published by C. Schmidt at Stuttgart in 1935, Chapter 10 tells how the elect person who has renounced the world receives the imposition of hands, among the Cathars the consolamentum, usually given at the approach of death, how he thus sees that he is ordained in the spirit of light, how at the last, in the moment of death, the form of light, which is his spirit, appears to him and consoles him with a kiss, how his angel offers him its right hand and also greets him with the kiss of love, how finally the elect person venerates his own form of light, his feminine savior. Let us now recall that a troubadour, lovesick with real love, awaited from the lady of his thoughts, who was in essence unattainable, and put, quote, in too lofty a place for him, footnote 2. It is well known that one of the set themes of courtly rhetoric is the complaint of that one loves in too lofty a place. Scholars tell us that the poor troubadour of socially low extraction, as a rule, fell in love with the wife of some high and mighty baron who disdained him. No doubt that happened in a few cases, but it does not account for the same plaint being breathed in the poems of Alfonso of Aragon, a most powerful king. For him, obviously, no woman in this world was too high. The real question is why the poet chooses to cast his love so high and chooses the unattainable. No more than a single kiss, a single look, a single greeting. Geoffrey Rudel, after long being in love with the image of a woman he has never seen, beholds her at last after a sea passage and dies in the arms of the Countess of Tripoli, as soon as she has bestowed upon him a single kiss of peace and a greeting. That is a legend, but a legend drawn from poems which unmistakably celebrate, quote, faraway love, end of quote. Other women are said to have been, quote, real, end of quote. Were they indeed more substantial than a psychical event? Several writers have suggested that the historical puzzle could be solved by supposing that the heretical church was reduced to clandestine operation and that the troubadours were its agents. From that puzzle we now pass to, quote, the mystery of a strictly religious passion, end of quote, which involves a mystical view of man. That view, in turn, is strongly upheld by the very experience of the human spirit. Let us see if, by going between the points and limiting oscillations of our inquiry, we can get to the reality which usually lies intermediately, the reality of courtly, lyric poetry, even though, because intermediate, it is by so much less clear and less pure.